Hello, and welcome to In the Light Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And I have a great guest with me today. His name is Matthew Wood, and he is a herbalist. Hello, Matthew. Welcome.
Greetings. Hi.
So, I have been reading your book, Holistic Medicine and the Extracellular Matrix. And
Yeah.
I am very excited by what I'm reading because it is, can I say, a scientific framework in which we might understand our body so much better, and
Yeah.
also why it is that holistic medicine, alternative medicine, is so successful. So this is a very exciting thing, and so welcome.
Yes. I'm very grateful to be here, and you did hit two of the most important points. Yeah. I actually wrote the book. I think of it more in terms of the validation of holistic medicine. It actually shows that this discovery of the extracellular matrix by the regulatory system for the extracellular matrix by Alfred Pissinger in the 1980s shows that or 70s that the body is governed as a whole on the cellular level. It's a complete unit. The cell theory is completely wrong. There is no such thing. The cells do not determine their own life. They do not determine when they feed, if they eliminate, if they replicate, if they migrate. All that is determined by the regulatory system in the matrix, which is a set of polymers, which are like fibers 1 molecule thick that go everywhere, that are kind of that is the actual brains of the organism on the cellular level. It's kind of hard to believe. So the brain is everywhere in the tissues, everywhere. The signaling. So if we have a bunch of salt, and suddenly the salt enters our system, starts diffusing gets in through the capillaries into the extracellular matrix, the space from the capillary to the cell, so to speak. There's a reaction. It's like, more salt, we have more salt, goes over, and the signals are simultaneously going everywhere throughout the organism. So all the cells are like, we have more salt, and they react as an integrated whole. So that's a revolutionary learning point. And Pissinger was a holistic doctor, researcher at the University of Vienna Medical School, a medical doctor. We can get into that if you want later on. But at any rate, that was a major point for me. Yes, and I have to say, it's kind of funny what you say. Yes, now you can understand your own body better. Yeah, that's exactly what it was for me. I actually wasn't really aware of that until this moment. You say that. I wrote it for me, like when I first came across this material from my friend Nancy Welliver, a naturopath in Seattle, Washington, said, "Hey, have you seen this?" And I started reading his book. She had it, and I was like, "Wow!" And this answers so many questions. Like when I've studied physiology and even chemistry and physics, it just sits in the air, like with no grounding. It's like, what's going on? It's just a bunch of disparate facts. It doesn't all link together, and it's been very hard. I've had to be self-educated in this, and then finally, when I found out about the matrix, this is like, I mean, they call it the ground regulatory system. It is the ground from which the basic cellular regulation for the whole body occurs. And it's the ground. It's like, I mean, everything arises from that. And the first multi-organisms in the ocean, when they were self-enclosed, and they actually were full of sea slime, so to speak. It's like sea slime enclosed itself in order to protect itself a little better. And the actual slime existed first, is actually the evolution, then the encasement, then it was a multicellular organism, and then it was one integrated reaction to everything happening around it. And out of that, so we have this, internalized Mother Ocean and this internalized sea slime, which are these polymers. And they're not just like a spaghetti mass they're more like feathers that open and close. Now, I'm sure they're all still all twisted up, but they open and close, and open with more hydration, close with dehydration. So one thing it actually explains, I mean, this would already been known, but wrinkles are when it closes up from lack of hydration. Well, so if we can, so we can understand our bodies, or physiology. For me, it was more, oh, I understand physiology now that you're understanding it. Yeah, oh, I understand how the body works better. Yeah, so same lesson, but I hadn't personalized it as much. Yes.
So I think we need to back up a little bit.
Yeah.
So what we're saying, or what the theory is saying, and I'm going to use, I guess, metaphor,
Yeah.
is that up until now, we've been thinking about cells
Yeah.
in a sort of individual sense, and
Yes.
being a self-governing entity,
Yes.
and the DNA inside it, being determining what that cell function is going to be, etc., etc.
Yeah. Yep.
But the problem with that is that it means that when there's a problem in the body
Yeah.
with symptoms, etc., we're looking at we're having a very narrow view of what is causing that, because we're just looking at that bit of the body, when in
Yeah.
actual, what we should be doing is looking at the whole system. And the reason being that a cell is not an individual unit
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yep.
Exactly. It's part of a community
Yes.
that linked. So it's a little bit like we're becoming more aware of the fact that trees and plants communicate with each other underground chemically. So that there's chemicals that are being released underground, and so there's communication going on between trees, between plants. Here it's in the body, whereby the fluid that didn't seem that interesting between the cells actually is the very thing which is the environment that's being created around the cells, which is informing the cells as to what needs to be done. So it's, I guess, in a sense, in the same way that we know that we as a body can be influenced by our environment, and it can be sick or it can help us be better, our cells are also part of an environment, which is this fluid, which wasn't all that interesting, seemingly, until we realized, actually, it's the essence of everything. It's the soil on which everything is growing.
Yes. Yeah. Plus the slime, both the seawater and the slime make up that ground level. And so the seawater is very important because of the electrolytes, and that's a whole nother avenue into the governance on that level, which I didn't get into, and which actually we don't see the mind behind the electrolytes at this point in time, except, well, we don't really, the matrix operates as a whole, the ground regulatory system, and the electrolytes fit into that. Maybe it's controlled by them. Maybe there's some primal electrolyte that controls them all. I don't know. But at any rate, so there is this integration, as you say, and yes, the cell theory is proven wrong. It was always a theory. And this whole sense of the individuality of the cell is like basically a projection of human life. We have the illusion, perhaps, that we think we are individuals, and or to some extent, well, we are more than the cells. It turns out. So we projected, oh, the cells are just like us. Oh, and another thing we projected was their brain is the nucleus. I mean, everybody just thinks of the nucleus as the brain of the cell. It's like wrong, beep, no, wrong. The brain is the reproductive organ, is the genitals, and the brain, it turns out, is outside of the cell. And so I say the best line in the whole book, I say, so we humans are always mixing up our brains and our genitals. And we did it here too. So, yeah, it is also just not how we think. It is a diffusion. Yeah. So the mycelium in the ground, which integrate the whole ecosystem of the trees and all the plants, that is a very good model. And once again, I mean, I spent so much time, I was a little bit like reading the book, and then I think the first person that commented to me, and which wasn't a botanist, said, "Oh, that's just like the mycelium you're talking about." I was like, yeah. Yeah. And immediately I'm like, I got to get out there and walk barefoot more. And then lo and behold, I read several places walking barefoot, how good it is for you. So yeah, grounding, as we say.
So can you just go back a little bit because you were talking about electrolytes. Can you
Yeah.
explain what electrolytes are?
Yeah, well, they are like salt is an electrolyte. That's like sodium chloride. They are two ions, one positive, one negative, stuck together in a loose kind of confederation. And then they manipulate things by falling apart by joining with, so the buffer that keeps the acid alkaline constant would be, where's the potassium buffer? Sodium is also involved. And so these things are constantly adjusting everything on that level, on the seawater level. And this, we internalized seawater of 4.5 billion years ago. And our water in us is identical to that Mother Ocean of that time, and not to the Mother Ocean of the current time. All microorganisms are all multicellular organisms from the first up to us. That we have is a kinship we all have. That
I,
same Mother Ocean.
I think that is quite aside from fascinating. I think there's a tremendous beauty in
Yeah,
the knowledge that the very fluid that's running and keeping, keeping us balanced is actually mirroring or a copy of the seawater that was there originally.
yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. So, okay,
I wouldn't say it's a copy. I would say it is the seawater of that Mother
wanted
Ocean.
I
And
was being I was to, to say it's identical. Yeah,
it's hard to believe, yes.
yeah.
It's identical, and it's like we internalize it and we're walking around with that ocean inside of us.
That's absolutely wonderful. So what we are talking about then is a model for health
Yeah,
in which the body or the fluid within the body is at a cellular level. So the fluid around the cells
yeah,
is regulating everything to keep a balance, to keep a harmony, and maintain health.
yes, yeah, throughout
Okay.
the organism.
So now I'm also, besides being a clinical hypnotherapist, an astrologer.
Oh yeah,
And
okay.
that makes me immediately think about the medical astrology model that was being used in ancient and medieval times, which is all about the balancing of the humors.
Oh yeah, oh right.
You actually talk a little bit about that in the book in terms of alternative medicine, like acupuncture, etc., about keeping everything moving and fluid. Tell us a little bit about that.
Um, yeah, let's see. Well, that was several different questions stuck together. What was
Sorry,
what was that? What
sorry.
was the first series of thoughts? Um, like it threw me a little bit. Yeah, can you repeat some of that?
Yeah, okay. So essentially what I'm asking you to do is to explain then how this link of the
Oh,
fluid
relates to
being,
astrology and
yeah,
yeah,
why that's, oh, maybe this is the better question. Why is it that that is relevant in terms of traditional medicines?
yeah.
What's the
Okay,
link?
yeah. The humoral theory, yes. Okay, so yes, indeed. The basic model of medicine in, so we have like what's, spiritism, the belief that spirits cause disease, which is widespread, and actually we still basically believe that, even though it sounds primitive to us. But then we have the humoral theory, which is like the first sort of organized medicine, that everything is fire and water in our system, or damp and dry, that's water, and hot and cold, fire, that would be Greek medicine. And we have yin and yang in Chinese medicine, and we have the three doshas in Ayurveda, and even, less emphasized with American Indian, we would have the sweat lodge, which has fire and water and interacting, and it's kind of a model of our body, the fire warming and all the steam kind of steaming out to the outside, and which is kind of like Ayurvedic medicine as well. So we have this universal idea of the humors kind of governing life, and it turns out it's not exactly the fluids, it's the stuff in the fluids, but that balance that needs to remain in balance. And so this is the basic primal theory of Greek medicine, of all these systems, and Greek medicine goes back to Egyptian medicine to 2000 BC. So all these traditions are BC, um, and it's like, so we keep the humors in balance. Now that is like Claude Bernard's theory in the 19th century, which is still in the books. The milieu interior, the internal milieu, determines what happens to the cells. So if that's in balance, then the cells are healthy. And so that's the primal thing we need to do in health. Now that came out at the same time as the cell theory, and it was rejected temporarily, picked up again with the theory of homeostasis. So homeostasis is the milieu interior, staying in balance there, and it fluctuates slightly, and then we get sick and it gets reset for a while at a different level, and then that releases and it goes back to normal. And so this was all established, and this was working towards, I would say these are very holistic ideas, and I did go through the homeostasis, but so this reestablishes the primacy of the humors, which had been left behind. And I wish I'd saved the quote, but there was one, I think someone just told me that they'd read a paper where the doctor just shook his head and said, well, we're back to the humoral theory. This is really disappointing for him. He was too old. And and to show you how recently this had an impact, so I started reading about the matrix about 2012, and Wikipedia at that time just had this article. It was just nothing ever changes in the matrix. If the fiber is broken, it remains broken. It's like ridiculous. No two fibers are alike. They're generated independently by enzymes. The whole thing is changing and shifting all the time. Well, that was changed, and so it's accurate, but that gives us a timeline and how recent this information was known in 1976. It took until 2012 for Wikipedia to catch up. So, but I'm glad you mentioned astrology, and I threw in references to astrology every once in a while in the book, because I wanted to offend anybody who was like too scientific. And I wanted to make it a book for us, for the alternative complementary scene. And my hope is that in 5 or 10 years, somebody in the regular medical scene, although it's kind of being destroyed by current events, but they would write this book, rewrite it, copy it, but plagiarize it for the regular audience. That's up to them. I'm now a lot less hopeful about science making that step, but due to the chaos in science today. But at any rate, yeah, so I did mention astrology, and it actually was an astrological physician. That's in the last chapter, I think, the in, mix, out of the matrix. Dr. Davidson, a great medical astrologer, he died about 1961. He was English or possibly Scotch, and he immigrated to the United States. And he suppressed his information. One lecture series alone survives. It's tremendous. Lectures on Medical Astrology by William F. Davidson, which is out of print right now. And it could probably be put back online. It can't really be copyrighted because it was it was recorded without his permission because he suppressed his information. The recording device was hidden. So yes, they did get it down. But at any rate, he said, all of life, it's just the whole body. All you got to understand, it's in, mix, out. And this is more true on the matrix level than any other level. Literally, the food through the capillary, in, mix, the metabolism, the cells doing their job, their digestion, cellular digestion and respiration and metabolism. And then out, they have to get rid of the waste products. And so that goes out through the lymphatic drainage, the lymphatic capillaries. And so that is just so simple for a health maintenance model, and so basic, and very much back to this humoral model. So, and really this astrologer, medical doctor, he got it, he said it right.
There are so many implications to understanding this, which is what, of course, what excited me. I got excited just reading the preface. You know, I hadn't even got to the introduction yet, and I was already excited because I could see where we were going. And so I guess what we're saying then is the very existence of everything is an ecosystem. So, you know, we who treat ourselves as though we are in some way these special beings that happen to be on this planet are separate to animals, to plants, to everything else. We are, you know, and actually, no, we have to understand that we are part of the ecosystem, and that if the ecosystem is wrong in some way because of things that we've done or not, that we also are going to suffer. It's going to have an impact on our health. So that's outside. But then it means also that for the inside, that inside of us, we have various ecosystems. We have a biodome. We have, and we now know we've got this amazing extracellular matrix, which if we take care of ourselves, eating the right foods, etc., etc., that remains healthy, we remain healthy. If we don't, that's causing an imbalance because it's stress on the system, and therefore we become ill. And now that brings me to the emotional side, because we're talking about stress. And I was excited because yet again, there was something else. You were talking about how this is why there is the mind-body connection, because the nerve endings all touch the extracellular matrix.
Yes, everything. So they do know. I mean, there's these yogis that can defy scientific principles. Hardly anyone else can tie their whole body into their nervous system and be aware of their autonomic, for instance. And there may be other ways they're doing it, but basically all nerve endings and disperse their leftover chemicals, their neurotransmitters, into the waters of the matrix. And from there, then it drains off, goes into a long time, goes into the lymphatics, then into the bloodstream, then goes by the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus reads it and says, oh, we need more of neurotransmitter XYZ. It's like, oh, it's nighttime, we want to relax, so we need more acetylcholine to like calm down. And then, oh, we woke up again, we need the catecholamines to get going. And it's like, so all the time we're like, the nerve endings are going in, and then the material is going through the matrix. And I'm not sure the matrix reads the signals the way certainly not the way the hypothalamus does, but it is also going to be influenced by these contents going through it. So so there is even a connection on that level. And I would say probably for mental emotional, as you know, psychosomatism is real. And as you would really know, in both in astrology and in hypnosis. And so Yeah, I would say the hypothalamus is a little bit more the key organ there, binding it all together. That's on the endocrine level. So we have, and just by the way, regulatory systems, ground regulatory system. Then we have the piezoelectricity for the skeleton. Then we have, which is a slow moving electrical current. And actually the matrix signals are just the charge on the polymer sits there, and then the salt comes in and goes, oh, whoa, and it changes. It changes in charge. So it's not as much of a constant signal. It's because it's more primitive in a way. So then we get to piezoelectricity slowly moving. Then we get to, oh, well, we get to hormones maybe first. Hormones, chemicals going through the matrix. And so the matrix has to be clean for all the hormonal hormones to get through, and from their place where they've been created to their receptor site. So the matrix is working on that level, and then finally the neurological system as well. So, and then the environment, yes, the environment is our regulatory system, it turns out, our ultimate regulatory system. And Pissinger said, people asked him, well, how about the single cell in the ocean? That doesn't have a extracellular matrix for regulatory system. And he said, the regulatory system of the single cell in the ocean, is seawater. You got it, exactly. And when that's maybe one of the most profound statements in the book. And it's a quote from him. It's profound because it just immediately, it's true, and it shows us that, throws it back on us. We are still the product of our environment, and we really have to be aware of that. And that's on both the emotional and the physical level. So, yeah.
So how come we are not basing treatment of illness solely on this model?
Yeah. So, well, it always takes time in science, and there's always opposition, but in this case, they don't even oppose it. They just don't even notice it almost. There's 2 books published on in English before I got there. They're basically just 2 different editions of the same thing by Pissinger and Harmet Heine, and they have some variation, but not a lot. And one from Germany, one from Hogg Publications in Germany, one from North Atlantic Books in San Francisco, Berkeley. So those, and they're by scientists for scientists. They're trying to make it a little bit more beneficial to us. But I wrote for the layperson, and while you say it's very scientific and technical, it's really, I don't want to say dumbed down because we're the dummies, but it is simplified as much as I could do it for the lay audience, and most people can get the gist. And it surprised me how much the popular audience liked it. I kind of wrote it for herbalists, naturopaths, practitioners, and it's like boom, like a lot of people saw it as a way of monitoring their own health, which is true. And I was writing more for the practitioners, but we want, the more that the public can do on their own, the better off they are, especially these days. So
I think that's very valid, because given that my own work is all about helping people better understand themselves, because having that understanding is empowerment, this very much into that category, because it connects the dots and helps us to see why it is that what we already instinctively knew and for centuries people had been practicing can be better understood as to why it works, why it's real, etc. And that gives people a renewed confidence in trusting themselves, which is extremely important. So I guess the question is then, we are looking at two different scientific approaches, because they're both based in science.
Yeah.
Why is it that the model for science, which is so predominant, hasn't caught on to this.
Oh, yes, you did ask that. Yeah, okay. So I would say there's two reasons. One is that Pissinger and Heine address. Pissinger asked that, well, how come this hasn't gone on quicker? And he answered, it's because people have been taught to think in a linear fashion. And that's so hypnotically ingrained in them that they can't think in a holistic fashion. And, then there's a bunch of us that can. So we think this way. But, this is scientific. So it's hard to grasp in that sense. Then one of the woman I quote, Dr. I can't pronounce her name, like -2 Eastern European. They don't make any, there's Z's in it and stuff like that. I don't know how to pronounce them. Dr. Anna, someone, she so perfectly said it. She said, one of the major problem with the matrix is that it's hard to visualize. And I took that almost as a motto for the book, because I'm trying to make it easy to visualize. And I do think I did succeed pretty well there. And
Yes.
so they don't even visualize it yet. And therefore, they're not really opposing it. They're not noticing it. And there's a lot of research on the matrix, but they left out the holistic, that approves holism. You just never see that.
And that's why I thought it was important to have a visual, metaphor,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
to help us to understand what it is. Well, I think this is certainly, it's hard to say it's groundbreaking, because it's like we've been practicing it for centuries.
Yeah. Right.
But it feels groundbreaking because it's so different from the medicine model that we are using in the West, which is not
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
And I did notice that in your book, you talked about spending your first 2 years
Oh, yeah.
amongst.
On the Seminole Reservation in Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did get like entrained in it. Well, as a hypnotist, well, the importance of the first 2-3 years of life, 2 years really very much. So you absorb the structure of the language around you. And I didn't speak. I was kind of a Saturn rising conservative sort of kid, but my dad says I understood both Miccosukee, the language there, and English. And when we left, of course, I forgot Miccosukee, but my mind was entrained. That was I now, that's the only explanation I can find. I just never felt like I was a part of
Yes.
the Western culture, and I never felt like English was my native language. And I had to study astrology. I don't think I said that in the book. I studied astrology to gain a language, because as soon as I saw the implication, this is a language of energy patterns. Oh my God, like this is why one person looks like another person. I've got to learn this. I dropped out of college to study it 3 hours a day, every day for like a year. And then after a year, I could talk to other astrologers, which was very exciting. But I realized I couldn't talk to anybody else. So then I had to translate from astrology to English, and that's constantly in my mental and verbal vocabulary, is kind of an unconscious assumed astrology that is just seeing Saturnian, Venusian, Martian, just constantly thinking that way. And then after that, after another year, I could talk to everybody. And then I became very verbal. I was not at all verbal up till then. I barely could manage. and and then I became a great speaker and writer. So um
I think
yeah.
it's quite interesting because obviously we're talking about, Native American culture that you were steeped in when you
Yeah,
were in your first 2 years. And so you basically are bicultural in a way.
yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Because you had that immersion into a
yeah,
culture that has a much more holistic
yeah,
approach
yeah,
to life. And you were talking about language. I think language is an expression of the way that we think, and
yeah,
so our perception of the world. And so if you have that particular language that you grow up with that has that vision of the world, then
yeah,
you kind of absorb it. and then of course astrology will be attractive to you, because it's the
Yes.
same thing. It's this ancient way of thinking, which is very holistic, which sees
Yeah.
thing as being a part of a whole. So it's a very very interesting to see that you when you wrote that is where you began.
Yeah, and I wrote that partly also to point out that like science, it's hard for me to like engage in science because to me it is innately genocidal. It really does. It's like we know better than you. And actually true science, I didn't get into this in this book, but true science is all is any way of organizing knowledge. So it could be intuitive science, flash of insight, oh, aha, and that actually figures in science, but they don't write about it. But and then there's a historical approach. What do people think? What do we think now, based on that? And authority, and that's like writing an article in Nature magazine, and your peers, the peer review. That's like expert testimony, and then or used to be, and then there's rational thinking in a straight line, and then there's experimental research, and there's empiricism, experience. Those are all different kinds of science that are valid. So they were very empirical, of course. It's interesting now. So Miccosukee, as I've been told, that's the Latin of the Muskogean language group, and that's interesting. The ancestors of the Miccosukee were really the kind of the priestly class in the pre-invasion time. And these are I mean, I don't want to insult the Seminoles, but they're kind of the hillbilly runaways from that group. They lost all the, they just somehow survived down in the swamps in Florida. And, you know, when I lived there in 1954 to 6, they had been in treaty relationship with the US government for 18 to 20 years. Like that's all. So they were like fresh out of the jungle of southern Florida. And because of that, they were more pre-Columbian, as anthropologists that worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs was visiting down there with my dad, and he was actually a Navajo, and he said the old people on this res are the most authentically pre-Columbian, close to that as anybody I've ever met anywhere. And of course, that's all changed, but they're still a very independent people. They're I don't want to go too far into it, but they say, oh, we're not related to all those other Indians, and the other Indians, Native Americans say, oh, we're not related to those people because they ran away. They disagreed with the elders, and you just can't do that. That in Indian America is like you're disowned immediately. You have no place. And it's very strange, makes them independent. But okay, so that's part of my background there. And you know, some of those priests way back there, they were astrologers. So this language is a rich, excellent language. So yeah.
Well, I am very, very grateful for your book, which has connected many dots in my mind as
Yeah.
to the why it is that things like acupuncture are so effective,
Yeah.
and massage, etc.
Yeah.
And it's just given me, it's deepened my understanding of the way that our bodies work, and for
Yeah.
that I am very grateful.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Even cupping is, I mean, now we really understand cupping. You know, some of these things, it's like, oh, yeah. And yes, herbalism, we understand some herbs that we didn't understand before. The mucilages, the slimy ones like okra. I don't know if you guys eat okra, but marshmallow root, okra, slippery elm. They have this, they have polysaccharides with the same, that's their matrix. And so we eat that, consume it, and it gets into our intestines. And guess what? The mortar around the cells is the same polysaccharides. And so yes, they can slip in. They remortar. They constantly are tuck pointing, remortaring the bricks, so to speak. and and then they also can slip in there. They do, a lot of them do get in quite efficiently. Then they remortar everywhere. So so we have a new view of that, the importance of the microbiome, the slime that's kind of living with bacteria in it. That's the slime from the sea slime that's living inside of us. That's not our own. So there's sea slime coating our intestines and sending signals back and forth. And as we know, some of it's good and some of it's bad. And it actually signals to the matrix. So we have the membrane there, probably pretty thick, all sorts of, 3 layers, and then of the mucosa of the small intestine. And then we have the sea slime sitting there, and then it's signaling to the slime on the other side, and they're picking up. It's like, oh, I didn't know that. Like, thanks for telling me. Thanks for warning me. And like, boom, we'll get new things there. And or like, oh, we're undermining, we're sneaking through and getting in and doing and spreading our bacteria or our viruses. So we have a way big, that's another frontier that's grown more in the last 20 years. That is being seen by conventional and alternative medicine, but they still don't get the holism behind the whole thing.
Wow.
So, yeah.
The book that we are talking about, once again, is Holistic Medicine and the Extracellular Matrix. And I will put a link to that on the description box. If people wanted to learn more about your work, Matthew, how could they do that?
Well, I have the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, which is online. You can find, I think I still have my website, although it's kind of been outgrown by the Institute, but woodherbs.com. And I do have talks, many classes with other amazing herbalists and even astrologers and experts in the field, and really interesting people. And so that's available. We have a monthly subscription that really makes it quite reasonable. And so that would be the main way. I will probably this year be speaking at a few conferences. I wish I had them lined up.
Well, what I will do is I will look for the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, and I can get a link and put that on the description box, and then people can find more about what you're doing.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okie doke.
And thank you.
Yeah, we didn't even get to complaining about science. If you want to, I enjoy talking to astrologers. They do the best interviews because they think like me, and so if you want to do another interview or anything, we could talk about.
I think we have a very rich field to plow. So yeah. I'm sure that we will be speaking again. Thank you very much. And thank you all for watching. And next week, I'll be talking about shamanic creativity. So until then, do remember to feel free to make comments, ask questions. I always reply, and do subscribe. Goodbye.
Bye.